Generet is a dying town. Dying, but not dead. And not without hope, as I said in my homily at Mass earlier today. And the passage we read from, the first reading for Mass, told us about the Sabbath rest, using that opportunity to urge you that if Generet is to find real renewal through meaningful work, the intercession of St. Joseph, we must honor the Sabbath rest for ourselves and for our employees and our dependents, even if that means losing some money. That was the first of the 3 points I wanted to make. Sabbath rest, the land, and the real value of labor. That second point, the land, is also based on this passage from Genesis. Specifically when he said, God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth." God also said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant all over the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit on it to be your food." The first thing God gave to mankind was each other. Be fruitful and multiply. The second thing was the earth and everything in it. The greatest wealth is, of course, the wealth of love, of friendship, of marriage, family, community. The second greatest, the earth itself. All wealth ultimately comes from the land. It includes water, too. Technology, currency, information, these are valuable, but all of their value comes back to the land. We need food and shelter. No matter how much Bitcoin you have or how clever your AI program, you will die if they can't provide you food and water. Even your technology will die without the physical resources that build and power it. If you dig deep enough into any calculation of wealth, you will find that it gets back to soil and water eventually. And what this means is that in our pursuit of economic renewal and worthwhile living in Generet, we should remember that we already have the most fundamental building block of wealth: the land. Yes, digital infrastructure and manufacturing and luxuries would be good to have, but only if we already have our feet on solid ground. God gave man the land for wealth because working the land also works the man. The symbiotic relationship between agriculture and humanity is part of God's design. And for a long time, working the soil was called husbandry because of the dynamic, life-giving effect it had on the one who husbanded the land. Part of our current situation here is the history of moving from the land to the manufacturing plant, which was good while it lasted. But when the manufacturing left, because it wasn't rooted in the land, a lot of the wealth went with it. But the land is still here. No amount of money or mass-produced goods can replace the effect that meaningful, real, land-based work has. Joseph was a carpenter and probably also worked with stone and a variety of other materials. He made real goods that came from the land and depended on the land. If we want Generet to thrive, it means we want the people of Generet to thrive, not just the tax base. Simply having enough houses and food does not make us thrive. Enabling ourselves to do meaningful work is a must because it dignifies us, builds up virtue and self-respect, and also provides the resources we need. Do I really have to point out to you all the ways that people suffer when they have food and shelter, but nothing useful to do? To point out the evil that people turn to with that kind of superficial providing for themselves? This is part of what's wrong with communism and socialism. They want to separate the connection between ownership, labor, and goods. Having my own wealth that uses my labor to produce what I need and what others need is part of what makes me flourish. You can't just arbitrarily assign the work over there, take away the ownership here, and dole out the food. I mean, you can, but then you strip man of his dignity and eventually of his will to live. There are many kinds of meaningful work we still have that aren't literally working the soil and the waterways. But when you really get down to it, land and water are the most obvious, most abundant, most guaranteed to be meaningful sources of both wealth and worthy labor. They may not always give us enough to have Wi-Fi and streaming services, but worked well, they will give us food and drink, especially with how much land there is here and how fertile it is. Some methods have shown that carefully, personally working as little as 200 square feet could feed a person for a year. Just putting in personal and communal gardens can do so much to supplement the real wealth of Generet, even if it doesn't feed every hungry mouth and clothe every body. What good is a lawn of grass if I am impoverished, and that same land could feed my body and strengthen my soul? When weather and circumstance make it impossible for machines to harvest food as a corporation, is it so wrong to allow those in need to do it as individuals, by hand, if need be, the way that fed the vast majority of humans to ever live? If it's a loss already, what difference is it to an owner if it rots in the ground for no profit versus being picked by the hungry for no profit? We are not yet so isolated or post-apocalyptic that we need self-sufficiency totally. But we really must take steps to get at least some self-sufficiency for as many individuals, families, and communities as possible. We have land. Ergo, we have the potential for real, meaningful wealth. We only have to see it for what it is and work it. As you may have noticed, my third point on labor has already come up. In short, labor is worth more than money. Labor is worth more than profits. And this is where capitalism gets into trouble. Labor is, or is supposed to be, good for the laborer. And I know many of you know that better than I do. Even if he does not own whatever he works on, productive labor is about more than the money it makes for the owner. It makes the owner money, yes, but it allows the laborer to express his humanity, to express the image of God in him by creating like God. It is necessary that businesses in and around Generet make a profit, a good profit. You can't run a business if you only lose wealth. But profit is not the most important goal of a business. The same way that pleasure is not the most important goal of sex. In both cases, it should be there. But it's not the goal. And when you aim at it, it goes wrong. The most important goal of labor is to provide for human beings goods and services that allow human beings and the things they care about to flourish. Joseph, the worker, did not maximize profits by taking advantage at every chance he had. He made stuff that people needed, which in turn made him the money that he needed to feed himself and God, living in his home. Jesus, God incarnate, worked with his hands to make stuff for people for profit. But we never once hear about his profit margins. We can assume he made enough to live on, at least until he started his itinerant preaching. But his annual revenue growth never comes up. Business owners, major landowners, entrepreneurs, bosses, these all provide an important service to the world. Speaking as a boss, I get it. But the instant that they make their power about maximizing profits at the expense of everything else, they have committed idolatry, worshiping mammon. And God means that literally. God wants brilliant and productive owners. He wants them to be good at what they do, but for the sake of real people. And I'm not talking about the good of distant, wealthy shareholders who have more than they need already. I'm talking about the good of laborers and customers and the community in which we actually live. I won't pretend to know all the complicated ins and outs of labor requirements and viability for businesses in and around Jeanerette in today's economy. I don't know them. But I do know the principles of justice and human development. And I know that it's better to die for what is true than live for what is false. A business that makes money for the community is good for the community that it's in. But money isn't all it's good for, or it shouldn't be. A good business ought to also build up the people in the community it's in. And I get it. If I can pay someone else less money for more work, that's more profit for me, and therefore more wealth for the people I care about. Okay, but there's a trade-off. I've now invested in the good of one person rather than the other by hiring one over the other. That's fine. And competition can be good to produce efficiency. And maybe this person needed it more, and it worked for them. But what if the person I invest in doesn't live here? And the person I don't invest in does. Ideally, in a healthy economy, they find some other kind of work and grow as a person in that way. Fine. But what if they don't have options? What if a combination of bad policy, currency instability, and bad habits has made it so that that person, my neighbor, simply can't compete? What if my neighbor is unwilling to go to the extreme lengths to compete with someone else who is desperate enough to put up with those extremes? And just because one person agrees to be taken advantage of doesn't make it okay, and it certainly doesn't make it fair to expect other people to accept that injustice just to compete. Again, I don't intend to cast judgments on particular situations. I'm trying to say that it's possible that if you zoom out enough and pay enough attention, you can see that some choices to improve a profit margin might come at the cost of leaving our own neighbors without meaningful and realistic opportunity. Realistic is a key word. I'm asking, what good is it to be rich if it means 70% of my own community is left behind in perpetual dependence and despair? Would accepting smaller profit margins, not bankrupting myself, but trimming the fat, would that allow me to offer wages and hours that make meaningful labor accessible to my own neighbors? If none of this applies to you or anyone you know, okay. I am not the judge, and I do not claim to know. I only speak the principles and truths that God has placed on me, hoping that your own conscience can judge what I cannot, or at least inspire you to see the problems I cannot, in a way I cannot. I love Jeanerette and the people in it. St. Joseph, for so long the patron of a school that educated so many in this community, is still our patron. May St. Joseph, the patron of workers and patron of Jeanerette, intercede on our behalf. May our prayers, may his prayers, by God's grace, give us the faith to trust God with our future, the hope to risk a change in the way we live and work, and the love to make that work truly serve God and neighbor, so that it yields the greatest profit of all, eternal life, shared with everyone that we love.